The small town of St. Haven was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the church stood at its heart, both literally and figuratively. Father Gabriel was a man of great reputation, respected, trusted, and loved. But on that fateful evening, under the dim glow of the old cathedral as lanterns, he did something unforgivable. The girl, young, trembling, and barely out of childhood, stood frozen in fear as his shadow loomed over her. His voice, once a source of comfort, had turned sharp, laced with something dark and unholy. His actions, swift and secretive, betrayed the very faith he preached. What he didn't realize was that just beyond the arched doorway, hidden in the darkness of the chapel as vestibule, a man stood watching. He had seen it all, every movement, every desperate plea, every terrible thing the priest had done. And he would not stay silent. The man in the shadows clenched his fists, his breath steady but his blood boiling. He had come to the church seeking solace, perhaps even forgiveness for his own sins, but now he found himself witnessing something far worse than anything he had ever done. Father Gabriel stepped back, adjusting his robes, his face calm, as if what had just happened was of no consequence. The girl, her face streaked with tears, pulled her tattered shawl tight around herself. She looked up at him with something beyond fear, disgust, hatred, something that would never fade. "You will say nothing," the priest murmured, his voice smooth, reassuring. "God forgives, my child, and he will understand." The girl said nothing. She turned and ran, her bare feet silent against the stone floor of the church. The man in the shadows, Michael, watched her flee. He had known Father Gabriel for years, had even confessed his own sins to him once upon a time. But now, the truth twisted inside him like a knife. He could walk away. No one knew he had been there. He could pretend it had never happened, just as the priest clearly expected. But as he took a step backward, the wooden floor creaked beneath his weight. Father Gabriel froze. Slowly, he turned his head, his dark eyes searching the dimly lit vestibule. "Who is there?" Michael stepped forward, his face now visible in the glow of the candlelight. "You?" the priest whispered. "Yes, me," Michael said, his voice calm but dangerous. "I saw everything." The priest took a step closer, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Then you know this isn't what it looks like?" Michael laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Oh, it is exactly what it looks like." Father Gabriel tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "And what do you intend to do about it?" Michael didn't answer right away. He had a gun. It would be so easy. One shot, and the world would be rid of a monster. But that would be too kind. "I'll make sure everyone knows," he said, his voice low, steady. "The town, the bishop, the world." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the priest's face. "You want to get away with it," Michael said. The girl was gone, but the damage had been done. Now, it was time for justice. Michael stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the cold stone floor. The priest's face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating. He was already thinking, already scheming. Michael had seen that look before. It was the look of a man who believed himself untouchable. A slow, uneasy silence filled the church. The candles flickered, their light casting jagged shapes along the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the stained glass windows. Michael knew what he had to do. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the chapel. He expected the priest to call after him, to try and stop him, to offer threats or bargains. But no words came. That silence unnerved him more than anything. As he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him like a slap. The town was quiet, its streets empty. The girl was nowhere in sight, swallowed by the darkness. Michael hesitated, glancing back at the towering silhouette of the church. He had seen terrible things in his life, things he had forced himself to forget, but this was different. This couldn't be ignored. His first thought was to find the girl, to make sure she was safe. But where would she go? She had run as if the very shadows were chasing her. Would she go home? Did she even have a home? Michael's mind raced. But one thing was certain: he had made himself a witness to something that could not be unseen. And he knew, without a doubt, that Father Gabriel would not let him walk away so easily. Somewhere in the darkness, a bell tolled midnight, and Michael realized with chilling certainty this was far from over. Michael pulled his coat tighter against the cold and set off down the empty street, his mind racing. He had no idea where the girl had gone, but he couldn't let her disappear into the night. She needed help, protection, something the town had failed to give her. He took long strides, scanning the alleys and doorways for any sign of her. The village was small, but the darkness made it feel like an endless maze. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward him. Every gust of wind carried whispers he couldn't quite make out. Then, in the distance, he heard something, a soft rustling, the sound of hurried breathing. He followed it, moving carefully, listening. Around the corner of a narrow street, he saw her. She was crouched beside an abandoned cart, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Michael approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "It's okay. I saw what happened." She flinched and pressed herself against the wall, her wide eyes filled with fear and distrust. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "I just want to help." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, as if deciding he wasn't a threat, she relaxed just slightly. "He'll come for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He always does." Michael felt something heavy settle in his chest. This wasn't the first time. His jaw tightened. "Not this time," he said. He crouched down beside her, lowering his voice. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" She shook her head. Michael exhaled, glancing back toward the church. The priest would realize soon enough that he had no intention of staying silent. And if what the girl had said was true, then Father Gabriel had done this before. And he wasn't going to stop unless someone stopped him. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flask of water, offering it to her. She hesitated before taking it, drinking in small, cautious sips. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, she gave a small nod. Michael stood, glancing around. The village felt different now, like something was watching, waiting. He had no doubt that the priest would come looking for them. The night was far from over, and the real danger had only just begun. As Michael led the girl away from the empty street, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The town of Saint Haven had always been a place of quiet routines, a town where the church's presence was absolute. If Father Gabriel had been getting away with this for so long, how many others had suffered in silence? And worse, how many had helped keep his sins hidden? The girl moved hesitantly beside him, her bare feet soundless against the cobblestone road. She barely came up to his shoulder, thin and frail, as if the wind itself might carry her away. Michael wasn't sure if she was trembling from the cold or the sheer terror still gripping her. "We can stay in the open," he murmured. He led her down a narrow alley between two shuttered houses, pressing them both against the rough brick wall. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he glanced back toward the church. It was still quiet, too quiet. Then, just as he feared, the silence was broken. A door creaked open. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. The faint glow of a lantern flickered across the cobblestones. Michael exhaled sharply. Father Gabriel was already searching for them. The girl tensed beside him. "We have to move," he whispered. They slipped through the alley, their movements careful, urgent. Michael's mind raced. Where could they go? The girl had no home, no family willing to protect her. And as much as he hated to admit it, he had no real allies in this town either. The only thing he had was his resolve. The inn, it wasn't much, but it was something. If they could just make it there, he could figure out their next step. Keeping to the shadows, they made their way through the deserted streets. Every corner they turned, Michael expected to see the priest's figure emerge from the darkness. When they finally reached the inn, he rapped on the door with urgency. After a long moment, it creaked open, revealing an older woman with tired eyes and a skeptical expression. "Michael," she said, frowning, "what's this about?" He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "I need a room, and I need you to forget you ever saw us." The woman's gaze flickered to the girl, who was half hidden behind him. Something passed across her expression, understanding, hesitation, maybe even fear. But she said nothing. She stepped aside, allowing them in. Michael exhaled. The door shut behind them with a soft click. For now, they were safe. But he knew it wouldn't last, because men like Father Gabriel didn't let their sins go unanswered. And Michael had just made himself his greatest enemy. Inside the dimly lit inn, Michael guided the girl toward a corner table near the fireplace. The warmth barely touched her trembling form, but at least she was out of the cold. The innkeeper, Margaret, watched them carefully, her face unreadable. She was one of the few people in Saint Haven who had never been easily swayed by the priest's sermons. Michael leaned in close. "We won't stay long," he murmured. "I just need time to think." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You playing a dangerous game, Michael," he exhaled sharply. "I am not playing." She studied him for a moment, then disappeared behind the bar, returning with a small bundle of bread and warm broth. The girl hesitated before accepting it, her fingers still shaking as she lifted the bowl. Michael turned his attention to the door. He didn't expect the priest to come storming in. No, Father Gabriel was too careful for that. but he would act soon. There were men in this town who owed him favors, who whispered confessions to him in dark booths and feared the weight of their own sins. And they would do anything to keep the priestess' secrets buried. The girl finished her meal in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He'll come for me," she said again, "and if you try to stop him, he'll come for you, too." Michael already knew that. He turned to Margaret. "You still have that back door." She nodded. "Through the kitchen. Leads straight to the woods." It was their best chance. Michael helped the girl to her feet, wrapping an old wool cloak around her thin frame. "We need to move fast," he said. Margaret hesitated. "Where will you go?" "Far from here." He had no plan beyond that. All he knew was that the farther they got from St. Haven, the better. But just as they reached the kitchen door, a sharp knock echoed through the inn. Michael froze. Margaret's face paled. Another knock. Then a voice, smooth, calm, and too familiar. "Margaret?" Father Gabriel called softly. "I know they ray in there." The girl clutched Michael's sleeve, her breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Michael's heart pounded. They were out of time. Margaret moved first, stepping toward the door as if to stall him. Michael took the girl's hand and pushed open the back entrance. Cold night air rushed in. Without another word, they ran. The woods loomed ahead, dark and endless. Branches scratched at them as they tore through the underbrush, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fallen leaves. Michael's pulse roared in his ears, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the distant sound of the indoor creaking open sent a chill down his spine. The hunt had begun, but as Michael tightened his grip on the girl's hand and pressed forward into the unknown, he realized something. The priest had spent years hunting his victims in the dark, but this time, the darkness belonged to Michael, and he would make sure Father Gabriel never hurt anyone again.